So I'm just going to present quickly now what we call our Accelerated Sustainable Energy and Resilience Transition Framework. This is the framework that we're proposing to operationalize the ASPS and give the strategy and policy a bit of arms and legs to get it moving. So just to recap on a slide that Leighton presented earlier for emphasis, it kind of shows the state of play, the state of affairs in the region. So right now, we have targets of 47% of by 2027. Now, extrapolating that to 2030, just to be aligned with the 2030 initiatives, that gives us 55% of total installed capacity should be from renewable energy sources by 2030. As of right now, we have 700 megawatts of renewable energy installed on a total capacity of about 6 gigawatts. That gives a penetration currently of about 12%, up from 8% in 2012, which then we have a change of 4% in 9 years. Now, if we take the assumption that the countries are taking these targets seriously and they mean something, we then need to increase our penetration by 43%. Increase the capacity by 2,600 megawatts, and the investment required is in the order of $10 billion in 10 years. That rate corresponds to now a penetration increase of 5.4% a year, up from 0.4% per year over the last decade, a capacity increase of 323 megawatts per year, up from 23 megawatts per year average over the last decade, and investment numbers in the order of $1.25 billion per year, up from $75 million per year. So we're talking about a 13-fold increase in penetration, a 14-fold increase in capacity, and a 16-fold increase in investment rate going forward over the next 8 years. So the conclusion can only be that we need very drastic, urgent response, and it cannot be business as usual. As such, CDB is noting the sheer scale and the pace required. We're proposing that there needs to be a framework that operationalizes the ESPS in a way that emphasizes the urgency and the magnitude of the task, as well as allows for coordination of resources and initiatives to meet the challenge regionally. So on that basis, we're proposing a framework called the Accelerated Sustainable Energy and Resilience Transition, or the ASERT-2030 Framework. Now, through this, we seek to identify key initiatives, instruments, mobilize resources, engage partners to pool resources, or simply track available resources, and then communicate urgency and the need for bold actions to our borrower member countries, as well as to allow for a coordinated approach to these bold and urgent actions that are required. Now, as I've shown earlier, this chart shows the rate of growth required over the next years. As we can see, from 12% to 55%, there's a steep and massive hill to climb. Now, we and the region will need some vehicle to carry us up this hill, and we can only see that we need a rocket, the speed and power to meet this urgency. This rocket that we see, we're labeling it the CDB ASERT-2030 Framework. It's going to be propelled by an ecosystem of ASERT initiatives, current and new ones which can be scaled and mobilized based on resources, current resources and future resources to be mobilized, and have been identified based on our experience in the sector and represent the big initiatives and interventions required to drive the transition. Now, the bulk of the assertive initiatives will be under what we call the transition infrastructure. So these are what Ken would have touched on a bit in his presentation, where we look at, the GeoSmart, for example, expansion of the transmission and distribution, electric vehicles, both vehicles and infrastructure, PV utility scale, and so on. Overlaid that, we then have the resilience element. So we have the micro and mini grids, transition and distribution hardening, as well as battery energy storage for resilience. This needs to be underpinned by governance and capacity strengthening. So we have the IRRPs, which is the Integrated Resource and Resilience Plan, which is a key plan that will be developed for each country, which then leads to a consultative framework and strategy towards each country's plans for deploying the renewable energy or performing the bold initiatives and actions required. Then on the top, we have the opportunities that I just spoke about in the context of the decarbonization thrust, led by the green hydrogen revolution, which then leads to expanded geothermal for hydrogen and ammonia production, as well as offshore wind, which could lead to large large capacity renewable energy plants. Now, each of these, linking it back to the energy sector policy, are founded under the various pillars that Ken would have elaborated. So, pillar, sorry, I missed the slide. Sorry, the situation is urgent. So, as we said, we need to identify gaps and strategies. We need to pool all of the resources that we have available regionally through CDB and our partners, and we need to identify gaps to mobilize resources, appropriate resources, and establish new partnerships towards that initiative. Now, as Ken would have mentioned, we have several pillars under our ESBS. Now, the infrastructure, as you would recall, are falling under Pillar 1. The governance and capacity fall under Pillar 2 and 3. And then we have, what about Pillar 4? So Pillar 4, if you recall, is around collaboration, cooperation with our partners. And I'm just going to put that on pause a bit to just transition that graphic into what we see as the framework. So here we have the assertives on column 1, sorted by Pillar 1 and 2. So Pillar 1 being the initiatives that we would have discussed in the infrastructure space, resilience and T&D and other generation type technologies. 2 and 3 is the capacity reforms, the regulatory reforms and capacity strengthening. Now here we have this framework which can identify the needs in the region for each of these assertives, identify what funding is available through our partners or CDB, and then Pillar 4 lends itself to collaboration and identifying gaps in where there is inadequate support or inappropriate support to help to move these initiatives at pace. So the assertive dialogue is what we consider to label under Pillar 4, which allows for CDB to engage with its BMCs individually or collectively and in collaboration with partners. And we need to challenge our board member countries to take these bold actions in the context of where we are, the urgent rate and the bold innovative initiatives that are required. So what questions do we need answered? We need to know what initiatives will make a major shift in each country to significantly expedite the transition. And then from our partners, what innovative, bold mechanisms can we work together to implement to support our countries? For example, a big one is under the theme of resource mobilization in terms of scale and in terms of appropriate blended concessional resources that we need to move to facilitate the necessary scale and pace of the transition.